So I'm here at the Washington Report for Middle East Affairs conference, and we're at the first break, and we just heard an exhilarating talk by Dr. Hanan Ashrawi from her home in Ramallah. And I'm here with our friend Paul Renshaw. Paul, what did you think about Hanan's talk this morning? What stands out for you from her talk?
She doesn't change. She is the epitome of Palestinian sumud. I first met her in 1991 in Ramallah when I took a church delegation from the UK. And she was so receptive on the one hand, but challenging on the other, to British church people who had a lot to think about, considering the history of Britain and Palestine. So I was glad to see her again. She was Hanan Ashrawi.
Paul, you and I met just within the last couple of months because you've been an advocate of your friend, Reverend Brian Brown, a theologian and activist, originally from South Africa, relocated to the UK, who was banned from South Africa for 13 years, I believe, until the freeing of Nelson Mandela. And his recently published book, Apartheid South Africa, Apartheid Israel. And we'll be interviewing Brian in a couple of weeks. Tell us about your relationship with Brian and why this book is so important.
Well, my relationship with Brian goes back 40 years now. So I've witnessed him being a challenging figure in the British church scene, challenging both churches and government on policy, British policy towards South Africa during the apartheid years. But I've become aware also, because I maintain a strong personal relationship, of his recognition that what's been happening in Israel is to a considerable degree mirroring that which happened in South Africa. It's not identical in every respect, but he felt that it was important for him to draw on his South African experience theologically and write about apartheid in Israel alongside apartheid in South Africa. And that's what he did during the lockdown in the UK in the last couple of years. So he's offering this book not just as a digest of international law, but as it's a book of political theology. And I think that it ought to be of considerable interest to people with a theological concern for the Middle East and Israel-Palestine in particular, and also I think for seminary students to really come to terms with what the implications of the last 70 years in both South Africa and Israel have been. 1948 was the year of the advent of the national government in South Africa, the apartheid government, as well as the year of the Nakba and the big change that came over the land between the river and the sea. So I believe Brian has a lot to say, and he needs to be taken seriously.
What was it that brought you, Paul Renshaw, to the study and activism around Palestinian rights?
Well, for many years I was working with what was first of all the British Council of Churches, and then churches together in Britain and Ireland, an ecumenical network in Britain, and my focus for a long time being on South Africa. And in the late 1997, some people involved with the ecumenical agency known as Christian Aid, which is like Church World Service in this country, asked me to go with them on a delegation to Israel-Palestine, because they felt that my experience in relating to South Africa and in the apartheid years might have some relevance to what they were experiencing. They were reworking their policy on Israel-Palestine, and that was my first experience. And it was an eye-opening time for me.
Those trips are, aren't they?
I was then, within 2 or 3 months, I was back again at the Sabile conference, and I think that was the time when Edward Said was speaking,
Yeah.
and in Bethlehem. And it was also the time when I met the ANC representative in Ramallah.
Oh, wow.
The young white woman. I was really quite surprised. And she was saying to everybody, well, you do realize what we stood for. We stood for a non-racial one-state solution. And that was in early 1998. So there we are. I've had fairly continuous contact. There's been a hiatus the last decade in terms of personal visits, but I've been there 7 or 8 times, and have always felt that the personality of Hanan that came through the camera all those miles from Ramallah this morning, that's the personality of Palestine that I know.
Absolutely. Paul Renshaw, thank you very much. So we're here at the Washington Report for Middle East Affairs Conference again this year, and the speakers have been amazing today. I mean, just some of the top-flight activists around the world in this issue. I'm just curious, Janet and Jeff, tell me a little bit about what's touched you today, what insights, what's been said that has moved you during the conference so far?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. You know, so much has stood out, but I think listening to Hanan Meshwari, at the end of her talk when she said, you know, the Palestinians are in the future. They're in the conversation that's going ahead in terms of human rights, freedom, dignity, and Israel is part of the conversation of the occupier, wanting to get rid of a people. And so the youth today are not willing to be silenced. And that hope of the future, I think, really stood out for me. I also loved, you know, what Virginia is doing.
That's amazing. I mean,
It's
these
amazing.
folks from Virginia, I mean, energy, curriculum. I mean, I was blown away.
To be honest, Michael, I looked at the schedule and I thought, well, that's going to be an interesting one, but I'm not sure. And we were blown away, and we're taking it right back to Colorado. In fact, we have a coalition in Congressional District 2, our House district. We call it a Coalition 2 for Palestine. I'm going to go home and suggest that we make it Colorado Coalition for Human Rights, to follow after them and begin digging further, just like the Virginia folks did and encouraged us to do.
I was really struck when a number of the speakers referred to the next generation, as you pointed out, Janet.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. In fact, we just heard about a year ago that the largest solar energy field in the country is being placed by Israel in Indiana. So it's an indictment of us, or it's a challenge to us to be more active and involved.
Yeah, definitely.
Jeff, what stood out for you so far?
Well, I would say
The
the
Virginia
Virginia
folks.
piece really was, and the fact that I'm looking around the crowd today, and there's a bunch of gray hairs, but I saw more younger people here. And when I say younger people, I'm talking 30s and 40s. But those folks are going to take over the movement when the rest of us don't have the energy. But I'm excited about the mix of the folks here.
You know,
And seeing friends. I mean, goodness, this is a place we can get pretty easily discouraged in our work. We have to feed ourselves spiritually and emotionally along the way. The activism has to be girded up with prayer and community, and this community opportunity is really helpful for me.
I was in Cleveland 10, 11 years ago at the formation of the United Church of Christ Palestine-Israel Network with Peter McCary and Gay Harder and a number of those activists who were really my teachers in all this. You all have been very active in the Disciples Palestine-Israel Network. I mean, very active. Tell us a little bit about that work, but also this recent resolution from the Disciples Pin.
Good. Marla Schrader and I are co-coordinators for the PIN, and she's the one that led me into this work. I went for a sabbatical in 1998, And to be honest with you, about 2 weeks in to that stay, in the first time was in Palestine and Israel, I thought, we have an anti-Semitic mission co-worker that the disciples they've appointed, because she was just telling me what's really happening in the place where I was.
Oh, wow.
And within the 4th week then, I had begun to see what was really happening, and Marla really led me into that work. Not anti-Semitic at all, just critical of the state of Palestine and what it was doing to the Palestinians, the state of Israel and what it was doing to the Palestinians. So she's the one that put me on this path, and we've been very, very active since then. I'm really grateful to Marla for that. Regarding this resolution, we had to have a COVID-canceled General Assembly in 2021, and so several of us have been working within the denomination to say we need to speak up, because we're partners with the United Church of Christ. We do our overseas ministries together, Board of Global Ministries of the Christian Church Disciples and the United Church of Christ. And they've led out in this in such incredible ways. And I think we, as disciples, have been trying to catch up with them. And just last week, our 3 officers of the church that are really authorized by our design, which is the disciples' constitution, they issued a pastoral letter that is quite clear in its condemnation of what's happening over there. It uses the words sin and apartheid, and I've been really pleased with that letter. And we want to take it further, of course. At our next General Assembly, many of us are working to bring a resolution where we'll be able to speak for the entire church. This pastoral letter, though, they're authorized to speak not just to the church, but on behalf and for the church.
Okay.
Which is an important piece.
You know, those of you who know Jeff and Janet Wright, on a broader scale, know 2 things about you all. First, Jeff, you write an awful lot for various publications, Mondoweiss, etc. But also you lead trips, like I do, to Palestine and Israel. And tell us a little bit about how you got into that, and just the importance of come and see, go and tell.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, we were over there doing some volunteer work, and our eyes were opened. And we thought, gosh, if we didn't know this, how many more people don't know it? But coming and seeing is the way you find out. It's so powerful to see it because it's right there. You can't escape what's happening, the reality. And so Jeff was on a seminary tour at one point and helped out.
Again, thanks to Marla Schrader. Did I mention Marla's name? She's a good friend. On that trip, we hear...
And this was in?
This was way back in 2008, 2000, whenever. That's way back. That's interesting. What I would say is there's a refrain that goes with come and see. The Palestinians, when we're there, say, now go and tell.
Absolutely.
And you have stories to tell when you've been there. Eyes are opened, hearts are opened, and it's really incredible.
This coming June, I will be leading my 15th tour, and we're going to break the 250 participant level. So I'm happy about that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well, we're trying to keep the faith, just like you.
Yeah.
Tell us about the number of tours you've led, kind of the things you do, and about how many folks over the years have you taken?
251.
It's not a competition. I didn't mean it to be that way. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't introduce it.
You're a dirty rat, you know that.
No, I don't know. We've done 10 or 12.
I think we've done 10 or 12 tours. We usually take maybe 25 people, 20 to 25. We have a trip planned in November for a congregation that wants us to take them. We have a seminary trip in January.
Oh, that's so important, seminary, future pastors.
Exactly.
That's not, I mean, I've
Exactly.
taken some clergy. I don't think I've ever taken any seminarians. So, I mean, that's so important.
Phillips Theological Seminary is a disciple seminary in Tulsa.
Oh, okay.
And one of their professors does an immersion course every year. And 2 years ago, she said, we want to do Palestine. And they usually do three different ones. And she came back to us last year and said, we're going back to Palestine. So we're excited about that, because you're right. We need pastors in pulpits that know what's really going on.
Absolutely.
And she goes with us, Dr. McCallie goes with us, and she's an educator and a theologian.
And Michael, we're not in competition. The more we can encourage each other's trips, I'm excited for what you've done. And there's other people. I think about Tree of Life. I think about all the
Fosna.
groups.
I mean,
Yes.
Fosna.
Don Wagner. We had dinner last night here at the gala. 39 trips he's led over the years.
That's wonderful.
I mean, he's, of course, my mentor, my friend, my teacher.
Yes, yeah.
So, Jeff and Janet Wright, Disciples Palestine Israel Network, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you,
Thank you
Michael.
for all your work.
Okay.
Appreciate you.
Blessings. So Don, we're here at the Washington Report for Middle East Affairs Conference here in Washington, D.C., and I'm here with Reverend Dr. Donald Wagner, past program director at Friends of Sabeel, Middle East Council of Churches, and all kinds of hats that you've worn throughout your career, Don. And dear friend, former Chicago Cubs fan, now Chicago White Sox fan.
Yeah, and there's a political story there.
Anyway, Don, it's nice to be talking to you. It's always good to see you.
Yeah. Well, you too, Mike. I just think the world of what you guys are doing in Fort Wayne. I wish we could get down there more, and we'll try.
Well,
But,
Don and Linda, Don has been a mentor of mine and a dear friend for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
Don, we're here at this conference. I mean, every talk has been a major kind of enlightenment for the those of us gathered here today. Give a couple or three particular insights or speakers that stood out for you today.
Well, we just heard from Gideon Levy, the great Israeli journalist from Haaretz, and he basically has said that we need to get tougher on Zionism. We need to go hard on issuing more programs that support democracy for everyone, equality, human rights, rule of law, and we haven't been strong enough. Our backs have been weak. And one of my old heroes from my rock and roll days, Roger Waters, he is someone who has that strong backbone, who doesn't give in when he's attacked. So we hear from people like that. Huwaida Erat, who's running up in Michigan, a sign of a young Palestinian now getting into politics and an activist. So it's been one after another. And just being in the presence of these prophetic people is inspiring. And for me, just to have a small role to be with them, it just lifts my spirit. And I think we need each other in this way. But also the hard-hitting analysis has just been tremendous. So I am just thankful I was here. I feel another renewed spirit, more networking and connections to continue the journey.
You've been about this work for 40 plus years.
Yeah.
And so to see the next generation, like Huwaida, who we've hosted in Fort Wayne, and others, I mean, it has to be really uplifting for you.
Yeah, we didn't have this, maybe 7 years ago. With the rise of JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, young Jews who now aren't buying the old line, who are critical of Zionism and are willing to be activists, who are involved on campuses with Palestinians and Students for Justice in Palestine, and are willing to take the hits and still go strong. This is one of the most hopeful signs, I think, and again, inspiring. And like I said, we didn't have this, until the last 7-8 years.
Gideon Levy emphasized, right, along with these human rights organizations, recently, apartheid. We need to keep beating that drum. But connecting his talk with your talk, you both emphasized the importance of boycott, divestment, but you both emphasized now the need for sanctions.
Absolutely.
Say a word about that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just learning from the South Africa experience. The boycotts are something that organizations and people do, and that raises the consciousness, awareness. It puts a little bit of economic support on Israel, but until governments get involved and lay sanctions, just as we're seeing with Russia in the Ukraine experience right now, until that happens, Israel's not going to change. They're not paying a price. They're not being held accountable. So it has to move to sanctions. Every day I pray that it moves to sanctions. And to keep the BDS going, that's an absolute must. And I think the churches can play a strong role here. And we have to begin to call for sanctions.
You have made so many contributions to the struggle for Palestinian justice throughout your life. But it's fair to say you've been known for your analysis and your critique of Christian Zionism.
Yeah.
And that's what your talk has been about today. Not only on the fundamentalist, dispensationalist right, but now later the mainline churches, progressive churches, Roman
Yeah.
Catholic churches. So talk a little bit about Christian Zionism. I know that you only have a couple of minutes to do that, but the gist of what you've been telling us
Yeah.
today.
Well, I was one of them. I came out of seminary having studied the Holocaust and post-Holocaust theology, where it began in World War II. And it's really a form of Christian Zionism. I call it hiding in plain sight. It's in our mainline denominations, and it's infected Congress and the Democratic Party, where you really privilege Israel because you don't want to be anti-Semitic, but also it kind of gives an exclusive analysis of Israel, that we should protect it from accountability in international law. And so dialogue with all the pro-Israel organizations is the key thing. But they tell us, check your concern for Palestine at the door. Leave it to us. That's too complex. It's contentious. We shouldn't be raising that issue. Let's just have good meetings and dialogue. And this is what our friend Mark Ellis calls the ecumenical deal. Forget the Palestinians. Just work on good Jewish relations. But now we've got to do the reverse. We've been weak. We've been kind of kowtowed to those kinds of pressures. So now we have to stand firm for justice and hold Israel accountable on everything. And the churches now, I think, are beginning to move. The United Church of Christ had a fantastic position last summer. I hope the Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Methodists are going to do the same. And we got to go hard on a critique of Zionism and Christian Zionism, but also move to sanctions.
Yeah. Really, the churches in this country are responding to this cry for hope.
Yes.
From our own Palestinian sisters and brothers in Christ. Say a word about the cry for hope. And also, if you can make the connection, we were talking yesterday and you said you've taken 39 trips. You've led 39 trips of Christians, Muslims, Jews, others from this country to come and see and then go and tell.
Right.
Say a word about this relationship between this country and our Palestinian friends overseas.
Yeah. Well, the cry for hope was they call a beyond urgent scream, cry to the global church and Muslims and Jews who will stand with them and begin to take a more assertive approach for resolutions that critique Christian Zionism, for advocacy with our legislators in every country around the world, and to move to sanctions, to continue to do BDS. So there's an activism and an advocacy component, but also to bring people to see it for themselves. I know for you and I was changed. You can't quite believe how awful it is until you see it. But then the hospitality of the Palestinians and their love just wins you over, and they're steadfast. Most of them just stay there. So these are clergy, pastors, we know them all. Mitri Raheb said, "We are occupied by two forces, the Israeli military and by the Bible. And we need you." That's a Western responsibility and an Israeli responsibility. We need you to help us now survive, because their numbers are dwindling. They're not going to leave. That's a hardcore. But time is running out. So we really have to elevate our activism, education, everything.
One of the things that you talk about is the need now for an intersectional Western response. It's not just about the Palestinian struggle anymore.
Right.
There needs to be this intersectional across various human rights struggles.
Right.
A quick word about that.
I didn't hit that hard enough today. Intersectional just means that we need to stand with our Black Lives Matter sisters and brothers, the Latinx, Asian,
Indigenous, right?
indigenous, and be there for them. Like when George Floyd is killed, and when we have marches and they're calling us to stand with them against the Chicago police being trained in Israel and then brutalizing the black community, we need to stand with them and advocate for them. But they're already ready to stand with us.
That's right.
When Ferguson was going on a few years ago, it was interesting that the the black folk who were out in the streets getting brutalized and taking all the tear gas hits, they were texting the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza who were telling them, don't use water, get an onion. Here's how you deal with it. It's made in America, but we've been dealing with this for 30 years. Now here's what you do, and get back. Don't lay down. Don't let it debilitate you. Get right back up. Get your onion on your mouth and get in there again. So that's intersectionalism, solidarity, and that's where we have to go.
One last question, Don, and don't be humble now. Don't be shy. Tell us about Glory to God in the Lowest. Glory to God in the Lowest.
Yeah.
Your coming to be published memoir.
Yeah. Well, I hope it'll be out by the end of April. And thank you for the 2 interviews you did. That was tremendously helpful for me and helped me with some rewrites, actually. It's really my journey from conservative politics that I was influenced by my dad, who was the treasurer of the Republican Party in the Goldwater campaign in Western New York. And I inherited that, and I inherited Christian Zionism. And this is my story coming out of that and coming out of 2 forms of Christian Zionism, finally getting politicized during the anti-war issue, civil rights, being a pastor in a black church and learning so much about racism from them, and then discovering Palestine. And then the last 30 years of my life have been committed to that. So this is my story, and it's a call to solidarity, a call to justice with those who are suffering.
And in the last number of years, you keep talking. One of the most important things about you, Don, and one of the ways you've taught me is your continued openness to growing your analysis.
Yeah.
So quick, settler colonial analysis
Yeah.
and liberation theology,
Yeah.
please.
Okay. Well, settler colonialism is basically what we've done to our indigenous population, what South Africa did, and what Israel's doing today. Regular colonialism, traditional colonialism, comes in and occupies, takes the resources, but eventually they're either driven out or go home, like the British in India or the British here. Settler colonialism never leaves.
Yeah.
They replace the people with their own settlers. This is what we've done. So we're a settler colonial regime. Israel, it's by design that Zionism replaces a land with no people for a people with no land. That's a theology and an ideology of replacement by any means, including violence and genocide. So that's settler colonialism. And what was the other one?
Liberation theology.
And
Your lifeblood.
Yeah, right. So liberation theology has really been very meaningful for me. And it's really, I think, following Jesus and the Hebrew prophets and Muhammad, the way of justice. And for me, it's Matthew 25. When I was thirsty, did you give me drink? When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? And you might say, when I was brutalized by injustice and occupation, did you stand with me? So it's a call of solidarity to the poor and the suffering, and that's our call for Palestine.
Reverend Dr. Donald Wagner, expert, activist, author. Look for his book, Glory to God in the Lowest, come the end of April. Don, thank you very
Mike.
much for a
Thank
lifetime
you.
work of witness.
Well, thank you.
So I'm here at the Washington Report for Middle East Affairs Conference in Washington, D.C. And I'm here with our friend Steve France. Steve's retired, but he's a prolific writer for Mondoweiss. He is involved with the Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. He's been associated with FOSNA. He's an activist, writer. And Steve, it's good to see you.
Good to be here. Good to have you in Washington.
Good. What has stood out for you so far from the conference? What has touched your heart or moved you, or some insights that you've
Well, I
received?
have to say, it was last night, there was the gala dinner. And, they have a tremendous lineup of people here, with only one, the 2 so far have been remote. So really people in the room, and there was, everybody got up and sort of told a little bit about themselves. But everything about it, everything they said when they came here, and the whole, it's like having a family. It was like being in a big family. Everybody knew what was going on, and they trusted each other, they admired each other, and they enjoyed each other. And so that's really the spirit that is special, I think, about it. I mean, there's a lot of great causes out there, but the kind of situation you have when you're trying to stand up for Palestinian rights creates a community. Just because by reaction to the fact that there's so many people who want to like push you away or not talk about it, when you find people who step up to the plate, you know, you got an immediate bond, as they said. So I really like that.
I was speaking with a couple of folks earlier, and they said, you know, we're in the trenches back home doing this work, and it's not only non-appreciated, we get slings and arrows because of the work. And so to come here to a conference like this, where, like you say, there's a spirit of community, you leave refreshed and renewed for the continuing struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you got new people, you know.
That's right. That's right. And every year, the speakers are amazing, but it's also about the networking, and not just networking, but as you said, the camaraderie.
Yeah. Well, I also say, you know, you can't do this activism stuff if it doesn't give you some pleasure, some energy, some you know, psychic rewards, and I like to use the fun word, actually. If it's not fun, you know, then yeah, I don't know if I could last myself. You know, some people are more dutiful than I am, but this is a great issue to be involved in. It's fascinating. There's like a million different angles on it, from every kind of angle.
We heard this morning, energy companies, curricula and textbooks, all of them connected to the larger human rights issue. Theology, I mean, it's all interconnected.
History, sociology, race, identity, politics, and more politics, foreign affairs, diplomacy, psychology. I mean, this is such a weird issue. And, you know, the way in which Israel has carved out this, or had carved out for it this bizarre apartheid state that is bizarrely tolerated and, in fact, condoned and supported by otherwise relatively normal societies.
Let me ask you this. The Episcopal Diocese of Washington, D.C., you know, I mean, you're a part of that
Yeah,
work.
Episcopalian, yeah.
Recently, just passed a resolution.
3 residents.
3 resolutions. Tell us about it.
Well, the big thing that's going on, and we were the 3rd diocese of the Episcopal Church to pass an apartheid resolution, which simply says that Israel is an apartheid state, and that we, as Episcopalians, find that to be a sin. It is, in effect, our resolution didn't quite get this theological, but in effect, apartheid is the ultimate sin. It's the sin that captures really the essence of what we're not supposed to do in loving our neighbors and in forgiving people and reaching out and doing God's justice and love in the world. It's like it's the perfect anti-God way to be, which we've done in our own country, and we know South Africa did it. And so for a church, this is the big one. Then we had also a resolution condemning Christian Zionism, which is very heretical and very violent distortion of Christian scripture, and also for the free speech right to boycott whomever. Everybody has a right to boycott, but there should not be laws that are targeted solely against boycotts on political grounds of Israel or parts of Israel-related companies and so on.
One last question, Steve. You just recently wrote a review for Mondoweiss on Brian Brown's Apartheid South Africa, Apartheid Israel.
Right.
Tell us about Brian Brown's book.
Well, Brian is amazing because he's, I believe he's past 80, but I wouldn't want to take him on in any kind of debate because he is like a pistol.
It's a tome.
It's a big book. He's lived the book. It's really a book about everything that he's lived through as a South African, starting in the 60s to oppose apartheid, and to realize in his society, to understand the apartheid mentality, which he was, had been kind of indoctrinated with, and then to have the experience of breaking through to like the Black consciousness movement in South Africa, which was a terribly important thing for the Africans to really come together and understand what was their responsibility and how their own understanding themselves and their place in the world is essential. And so Brian's group, the Christian Institute, like bonded with black consciousness, and he says an extremely exciting, life-affirming, identity-expanding experience. And then he got banned by the South African
13
government.
years.
So yeah, he was banned under a ban for 13 years until Mandela was released. It was so incredibly tough to be banned. I mean, you can't meet with anybody. I mean, one person at a time, and even then, you better be careful. So he went to Britain, and he's lived there ever since. But he immediately kept the fight going by being the Africa Secretary for the British Council of Churches. Meanwhile, he had already figured out what was going on in Palestine was the same exact problem. So he has lived this whole thing, and he can tell you the spirituality of apartheid. He can tell you the history of it, the sociology of it, kind of like apartheid from the inside. These human rights reports, you know, they look at the outside, go, look, here's what's happened to Palestinians, boom, boom, boom. It doesn't happen. And so they've got the objective facts, prove it. He gives you all of the deeper, more human, psychological, theological, spiritual kind of elements, as well as plenty of facts, because it is really like a rich book. And I think he's the man of the hour. His book is the one that will show how liberal churches in this country and around the world are going to move to make the turning point from seeing a problem and being unhappy about it, and hoping that maybe it'll get better and saying the right things, to actually seeing it as an incredible challenge that they have to face, that we have to face as liberal Christians, true believing way Christians, and that's our job as Christians. There's no way around it. And I think that Brian's book leads you right down the path to that reaffirmation of our most fundamental beliefs.
Steve France, my friend. So we're here at the Washington Report for Middle East Affairs Conference, and we're with our friend Linda Mansour. And I always say about Linda that she knows everybody, not only in Palestinian rights circles, but also in progressive political circles. Linda, what stands out for you from what's happened already this morning at the conference? Name one or two things that really has been insightful for you, that has touched your heart.
Well, what always touches my heart is, I was just saying to you, I feel like I'm home when I come and see these committed individuals that have been here the long haul. This is not newbies that have just become activists. These are like committed people that do the real work. So that, for me, is always invigorating, because sometimes you give up hope for a second, but then you remember that, no, there are people that you can hold hands with and keep going. You know, what I've learned today, what did I learn today? Is that your question? I was very impressed by the Virginia Coalition on Human Rights.
Amazing, the kind of work that, and it's very detailed. It's
detailed, and you could actually draw a map and follow it all over the United States, in the education field, in so many fields. In fact, when they were talking about BDS, what came to my mind is, and I'm going to use this opportunity to share this, because I really want people to think about this. In Ohio, I helped working on the fighting BDS, anti-BDS legislation, and we were gung-ho, and there was 60, 70 of us that were either Catholic, Christian, Jewish, businessmen, professors. We were the whole gamut from the whole state, and we were so invigorated. We were so proud of ourselves. There was so many of us. On the other side, there'd be only one at a time, but each one was representing thousands. But yet, it was good. We were together, we did the work. When it went up for a vote, we got shot down. But what was really interesting is that one of the senators asked to suspend the vote, to suspend the rules, so that they could vote on his resolution, which had no oversight. And the resolution was to change the percentage that could be invested in foreign bonds and currency, and from the Ohio Treasury. And at the time, it had gone up to 1.5% to 2%. Now we have in Ohio $250 million of our state treasury invested in Israeli bonds. And so when they were talking about BDS today, anti-BDS legislation, and I went and spoke to them afterwards, I told him the story. I said, did you look at that? He said, no. And I'm thinking, we need watchdog.
That's right.
All over, in each state we have, I mean, there, you know, what they were talking about is basically having watchdog. They suggested we go once a month, and that was interesting too, that as a group, and talk to the legislators, but we need to focus on where the dollar is, because that's where the undercurrent, I think, really is. In our example, we were focusing on this BDS legislation that was maybe 3/4 of a page and really had no teeth. There was no punitive piece to it. So, yeah, but then in the meantime, suspend the vote and let's put $250 million in Israeli bonds.
Yeah.
And the Ohio people are starving.
They weren't going to pay a price if they had voted it down.
There was no oversight.
Yeah.
So that it brought to my mind that we really need, the work they're doing, the Virginia Coalition is amazing work.
That grassroots effort that's so detailed and specific. I mean, these people really are models.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with the man from CARE too. I mean, what an energetic. I mean, he brought dynamism to the effort, and again, attention to detail,
and not giving up. I mean,
and hope that you can make a difference.
This guy was in their midst for 10 years, and that doesn't stop us. We're going to keep doing our job.
From Columbus, Ohio, by the way. You saw that.
Yeah.
Tell us just briefly, Linda, your background. Where's your family from? And I mean, this has been part of your lifeblood, this Palestinian activism. I mean, it's part of every Palestinian's life. But just say a little word about yourself.
Well, I myself was born in Walter Reed Hospital, Washington, D.C. My dad was in the U.S. Army. But my dad is from a town called Bira, next to Ramallah, in the West Bank, and my mom is from Lifta, the beautiful village of Lifta.
Oh my God, I've been there.
Yeah. Well, and Lifta, there's the lower Lifta and upper village. So she's from the upper Lifta. And, we were raised from, even though my dad was a proud American. And, that's why he joined the Army. In 1948, he went to school here, but America was an example. And I'll tell you a little story. When, after September 11, as he was coming back from overseas, and a young man, customs or immigration person, stopped him and said, "Sir, how long have you been a U.S. citizen?" And he said, "You know what? Before your mother, by your father. You have no right to ask me that." It was like, how long do I have to prove myself?
Wow.
So that's what I grew up in. This man that was committed to being American, to being Palestinian, but being the American that we should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's almost like Huwaita's story, right?
Yeah.
You have not only been an activist in Palestinian rights, the movement, but you've also been an activist in larger progressive circles. Say a word about that.
It's the same. It's human rights. It's civil rights. And, and you bring it up now that this Ukraine thing is going on, and it's like, oh my God, we couldn't have asked for better marketing. But, this whole white supremacist move, you think, wait a minute. So these are the ones that are up here, but that's that bias that people don't know they has just come out of the woodwork. So for me, children, women, African American, Hispanic, white, it's all human rights.
Linda Mansour, thank you so much. Everybody who knows you loves you, and you're the one who brings energy and joie de vivre.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ma première langue, le français.
To our work together. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
We'll take your So I'm here at the Washington Report for Middle East Affairs Conference in Washington, D.C., and I'm here with Walter Hixson, Dr. Walter Hixson, a scholar, activist about the Israel lobby. And so, Walter, I want to ask you first your reactions to Hanan Ashrawi's speech this morning. What stood out for you from her talk?
Well, she's such a legendary figure and has been at this for so long, and of course is right there in Palestine. So she brings a perspective that very few people have of decades of effort to try to find justice and peace in the region. And so it's always great to hear her, and that she maintains hope in the face of all the struggles for as long as they've gone on is very inspirational.
You kicked off the conference this morning by simply asking and then answering the question, why are we here?
Yeah.
Walter, why are we here?
Well, we're here because it's a conference on the Israel lobby, and despite the fact that some people don't recognize the influence of the lobby is tremendously significant in the Palestine issue in the United States. So I go through its origins, its evolution, how it gained power, the tactics that it uses. In my book, Architects of Repression here, I go into great depth on the lobby. And so I just gave an overview of that and really the pernicious influence of the Israel lobby, especially its domination of the Congress, is something I emphasized.
So the domination of the Congress. Name 2 or 3 other ways that the Israel lobby influences us in Ohio and Indiana that we may not even be aware of.
Well, it's certainly got a pervasive influence in the media, and so one of the big problems is the very poor media coverage, even from prestigious publications like the New York Times. For example, the Times is yet to acknowledge that Amnesty International declared Israel an apartheid state. So it influences the media, but probably the most significant thing is Congress, the control of the purse strings, all the money that it gets, and much of that goes under the radar because they don't debate. There's no debate. The money's just handed out. The support is just there. The congressmen are all mobilized. They know they can pay a price. And you asked about tactics, so they can be targeted in the next campaign or their opponent funded if they step out of line. So with a very few exceptions, really astonishingly few exceptions, the Congress is really under control of Israel.
Your prime example was Mitch McConnell.
Right.
Just say one quick word about
Mitch
McConnell in the pocket of the Israel.
Yeah, he's received more funding from the Israel lobby than any other politician in American history. And so I mentioned when he first won his Senate race, it was very narrow in Kentucky in 1984. And he went to the lobby and he said, what do I need to do to get you guys to back me in the future? And they said, we're nonpartisan, you vote our way, and you've got it. And so he has been a staunch supporter of Israeli apartheid and injustice in Palestine.
Walter Hixson, his books are necessary reading if you want to understand the Israel lobby's influence in the United States. Walter, thank you very much.
Thanks for all you all do at home. And that's where it begins on the home front and it'll work its way to Washington.
Thank you very much, Walter.
Okay, thank you.